as South Africans, the tendency is to actually be very simplistic about understanding the challenges that we face as a country. And whenever I come and I listen to Andre, it always sobers me up, because what he does, it actually makes it a little bit more interesting. It makes it interesting in a much more difficult way, because what it does, it actually makes you aware of how complex the challenges that we as a country are facing and the things we need to do to get it done. And most of the time, it has absolutely nothing to do with Jacob Zuma at all. I'm going to talk about how we are, in a sense, the biggest enemies that you can think of why it is that we are where we are. Of course, my focus tends to be political, but of course, having had Andre, the politics and the economics are not far removed from each other. Barbara Tuchman, a while back, wrote in a book called The March of Folly. One of the most compelling paradoxes of history is the pursuit by governments of policies contrary to their own interests. So the fact that we are disappointed today, it's a clear indication of how a political party could actually see itself marching almost into an incredible hiding come 2019. They know this. It's not a surprise. They actually know that unless they deal with the challenge that they're facing, there will be a response. And the good thing about South Africa is that a response will come. It is about us as citizens, in the sense that we too pursue things that are contrary to our interests. So if we want to understand why are we where we are, it is very interesting that we will always pretend that somebody got us here. Nobody did. We did. The man with the finger is that when we think about people like Trump, and I like to compare Trump to Zuma and you comparing to PW, is that it is amazing how we have this incredible belief that things will be different from what they really are. When we voted for Zuma, we actually knew exactly who he was, just as much as the Americans knew exactly who Trump was when they voted for him. Nothing indicates that once you've made that decision, there'll be any different behavior from the one that you got. When people are once in power, they don't change. So when Zuma got into power, he had how many charges behind him? 789. What did they relate to? The big word, corruption. So why did we think that when he got into power, he will be any different from what he was before he walked in? The interesting thing is that nothing about him is actually surprising. We knew exactly what he will do once he came into office because he told us so. And then we get surprised when he actually behaves in a manner that is very much what he said he's going to do. Then there's another man. Something about this finger that's so liked about him. As Andre indicated, the most amazing thing about him is, of course, that he is now coming across as the leader of the world. Another finger, except this time around is a lady. The interesting thing about her is the extent to which she's probably even worse than Trump in her nationalism, as far as that is concerned. Then, to emphasize the ability of people to change, there were two parties that were running, one conservative, one socialist, with very, very big names that we thought would actually be the ones that are actually going to win, but they didn't make it. What it tells you is that citizens, when they want to make change, they can do it, and they can do it very, very quickly. Jacob Zuma is an interesting man. I like to display him in his war regalia. Many, many years ago, he said something in Sizulu that most of you might not have heard, or if you heard it, was probably mistranslated. He made a statement to this effect. Ngalusa ngakhathwa. Now, when a Zulu man tells you that, well, translated simply, it means I looked after cattle or sheep, so I was like a shepherd or a cowhand. I looked after, and then ngakhathwa means that he was involved in stick fights, and he was taught how to be the man who doesn't just back off. And he doesn't back off. When he's in his space, he's probably one of the most articulate people you've ever heard. Bonang, you have heard him speak in Zulu, so you're probably one of the privileged people in this room. Why am I telling you that? The people that are going to decide his fate don't speak your language, they speak his. Then, of course, the biggest challenge is that come 2019, What are you going to do? And then, of course, the challenge, of course, what it leaves is to go back to what Andre has spoken about, is we just muddle along, because the consequence of that, I think in one of your slides, the last point that you made in the bullet point, leadership, governance, being the biggest challenge that we're facing as a country. So how did we get here? Just a quick reminders. Remember that? Remember that one? All of that. If you go back to the statement, we knew in advance. None of this was actually quite secret at all. It was stuff that we knew. And when it led to what it led to, nothing was new. And then, of course, we have the state capture report, and all things become very interesting, and it becomes the life of Brian. So we know that somebody is, we think, playing us, like the puppets that we might be or not be. How captured are we really? The interesting thing about we South Africans and our politics is that we are very quick to look for areas where we believe we are powerless because somebody else is playing us. But the most amazing thing for me is that hardly anybody here in this room is captured. And I would argue that at the political level, the most determinant of our success is probably very little to do with politicians, junk status notwithstanding. It's about how are we as individuals responding to the state of the freedom that we enjoy, the freedom that actually is in our hands, as opposed to in somebody else. So we expect that when the vote takes place, there will be a vote of no confidence because we're being told a lot of the members in the NEC are heartful with him. That is probably true. But he knows that for that decision to be taken, somebody has to actually work without or outside of the confines of how politics actually work. They have to say, I'm going to go to Parliament, I'm going to do what Ben Turok did, I'll vote against my party, which is the party that brought me to this position. Not many people are going to do that. Help yourself and help me. Don't stress about Jacob Zuma. He's going to be around until 2017, and that's a foregone conclusion. But the good news is he won't be around after that. Why? Because after 2017, he's no longer going to chair the NEC. You know who she is. Well, number one, I think she represents one of his power bases, the African Women's League. But more important, she also represents a particular view, which is very, very important in determining the outcome of where we as a country are going in terms of electing our leaders. The first thing that she did when she was elected, she said, we're ready to have a woman president. She has the backing of one of the biggest constituencies out there that is becoming much more vocal and much more powerful than I think most of us are realizing. And then, of course, there's the Oros man in the middle there. The Oros man is the president of the ANC Youth League. Until they take a different view, although they're indicating they're going to vote in a particular way, they're still very much for, and until Msholos leaves, they're still very much for him, and they will ensure that he sticks around until the end of his term. South Africa has changed, and has changed incredibly in the last couple of years. One of the most dramatic changes is that these two friends, Evan Jim and Dumo Dlamini, were the best of chomies. They no longer are. The good news about that is, of course, is that Evan Jim has now tied up with Mr. Vavi, and the two of them have created a new entity called the South African Federation of Trade Unions. The biggest challenge is that when Evan Jim took NUMSA out of the ANC in the first time around, we probably don't know how much impact that had in the elections in 2014, but what we do know is this, is that a big constituency was taken out of Cosatu, which drives how Cosatu votes. The good news is that once NUMSA broke out and now SAFTU, is that the ANC does not have the muscle to actually get the kind of political backing that it actually enjoyed in the past because the organizing power is no longer there. The sheer fact that Cosatu is no longer the entity that it was means that the ANC is almost predetermined, preordained to be an entity that is less than what it actually is. But what has happened in the ANC in terms of the alliance is probably more determinant of the outcome in 2019 than anything else that you can actually see. I don't think you're going to see the demise of the ANC, but you're going to see a party that is much different from what it is. Now, students have taught us a lesson. Of course, we might not agree with how they've gone about doing what they've done, but what they've done is actually create an incredible amount of public consciousness about the ability to actually change how politics works. So from the student movement, you're starting to see social movements that have different names, but actually most of them originate from the comfort that we got from students being able to take up to the stand and actually driving a point. Some of us in this hallowed borders might not have enjoyed that experience. It was very traumatic, but what it did was to engender a different way of us as citizens to actually interact with the environment. Much more important to start to challenge and to actually drive towards achieving the objectives that we want. The good news about South Africa is always this for me from a political point of view. If I ask you this question, who is going to be the next president of South Africa? What will be your answer? Ramaphosa. Nkosazana. I think when I ask students, they come up with much more interesting questions than the one that you guys come up with. So if you ask them the question, so who's going to be the president, they have a much bigger smorgasbord of potential leaders that are out there. It varies from Gwede Mantashe to Lindiwe Sisulu to Balage Mbete to Paul Mashatile to Malusi Gigaba or even, for that matter, Mmusi Maimane. The interesting thing about South Africans as citizens is that they actually change their minds. Now, here's the interesting thing about South African politics. If you were to look at all the parties that you voted for in the ballot box, there's an incredible incestuous relationship between them. Now, here's how it works. So you start out with the ANC, and you say, but the ANC has nothing to do with the DA. And then I remind you that the DA was in bed with the former National Party before it broke out, and some piece of it went into the ANC, and the other ones went to the DA. And then you go one step further, the next one will be the EFF. Well, Julius Malema used to be the president of the African Youth League, and then he got booted out. You go one step down, and you come up to one party that's a little bit different, and that's the Conservative Party. We can put them aside until you realize they were part of the National Party, which broke down and became the Conservative Party, which went to bed with the ANC and went to bed with the DA. So the incestuous, interesting thing about South African politics is that actually they all belong together. So the possibility that this relationship forged between Julius Malema and Mmusi Maimane is going to be a major factor to contend with come the 2019 elections. Don't downplay that. Then, of course, the interesting story gets muddied by the dynamics, I think, within the opposition. I think one of the biggest challenges, or one of the biggest gifts that Zuma gave to South Africa was the fact that he was almost making sure that the opposition becomes bigger. She is the leader in the DA. That's Mbali too. Mbali is currently under the cloud, just like the previous boss of hers, who I think is an admirable leader. And it'll be interesting that if she was playing her cards, this moment would remind you of another moment that we've seen before, probably much closer than that. Between her and the Ahang leader would have been very interesting. So I think she's still a power to be reckoned with. I think she shouldn't be written off, but she does muddy things around the challenge of the opposition to capitalize on the current disarray and confusion of the ANC. This speaks to the fact that people will translate the real impact of political decisions at their pocket. You're going to see some challenges with wage negotiations, which going to be very interesting because historically you had the Cosatu being close to government via the alliance. Now you have a bigger bloc of parties that are now probably going to be, in terms of size, challenging to Cosatu, being standalone and counteracting the impact of Cosatu and its impact on the alliance. Then the last one is that when you are sitting in the Western Cape, this is probably much more real than when you are in Johannesburg. We are in the throes of an incredible drought, which probably is more significant than Zuma in determining how people's outlook will be come the end of 2019. I thank you.